They call it a place of conservation. I call it a museum of things that should stay buried. Welcome to the Stone Pine Wildlife Refuge, a place in the Arizona desert where the animals aren't the only ones being watched. My name is Diego Silva, and I came here seeking quiet, a place to forget the sounds of war. Instead, I found myself living by 3 strange rules, just to survive the night shift. What's the creepiest sound you've ever heard in the wilderness? Tell me in the comments below, and if you're brave enough to enter the Stone Pine after dark, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here, the past isn't dead. It's just waiting to be fed. The first watch begins now. I came to the Stone Pine Wildlife Refuge to trade the echoes of war for the sounds of nature, hoping the call of a wolf could drown out the memory of a dying soldier's last breath. But the animals here in the high, lonely desert of northern Arizona, they make noises I've never heard in any textbook. Sounds that crawl under your skin and nest in your brain after the sun bleeds out behind the mesas. My predecessor, a vet named Dr. Colton Briggs, they said he took his own life. A man who spent 40 years saving animals doesn't just decide to quit breathing. I took his job, his small, dusty office, and the 3 strange rules he'd scrawled on the office whiteboard in a shaky, desperate hand. A final will and testament for a job I was beginning to suspect was more than just a job. If you hear roars with a job, no source. Wear the iron bracelet from the office. Carry fresh meat when passing the extinct species section. They're still hungry. When a door opens by itself, count backward from 10 and run. The air here is thin and should smell of pine and dust. But near the extinct species wing, where the empty, high-security enclosures bear the names of things gone for 10,000 years, it smells of cold, freshly turned earth, and a faint, coppery tang of blood. They told me Dr. Briggs' last report just said he was going to feed the artifacts. They found his empty meat bucket lying right outside the barred gate for the aurochs, an animal that hasn't walked the earth since the 1600s. My name is Diego Silva, and for 6 years my hands were trained to stitch up soldiers and working dogs in the dust of places I was supposed to forget. Now they were meant to care for endangered wolves and rehabilitated cougars. A quiet life, that's what I wanted. The refuge's administrative director, Marla Breck, had painted a perfect picture during my interview. She was sharp, charismatic, with a politician's smile and a conservationist's vocabulary. She spoke of groundbreaking research, of wealthy, anonymous donors passionate about preserving the planet's legacy. She spoke of Dr. Briggs's death with a beautifully rehearsed sadness, calling it a tragic loss for the community. The night guard, a grizzled, world-weary man named Kevin Dune, who smelled faintly of whiskey and regret, gave me a different orientation. He just pointed a shaky finger at the whiteboard in my new office. Briggs wrote those a week before he checked out, Kevin had mumbled, his eyes avoiding mine. The kid before you, a summer intern, he thought Rule 3 was a joke. We never even found a footprint, just his car, still in the parking lot. My first night shift was a baptism in unnerving silence. The refuge, sprawling over hundreds of acres, felt vast and empty under a brilliant canopy of stars. I did my rounds, checking the enclosures. The wolves were restless, pacing, their ears flat against their skulls, whining low in their throats. They weren't looking at me. They were staring out into the darkness at something I couldn't see. It was close to 2 a.m. when I heard it, a deep, guttural, chest-rattling roar that was definitively feline, but far too deep, too powerful for the cougars housed half a mile away. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a sound that vibrated up from the soles of my boots. The wolves began to howl in a chorus of pure terror. My military instinct screamed at me. Apex predator. Unknown location. Threat imminent. My rational mind reeled, but the first rule on the whiteboard blazed in my memory. I hurried back to the office, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the top drawer of Briggs's old desk, exactly where Kevin had said it would be, was a heavy coiled bracelet of what looked like cold-forged iron, its surface worn smooth with time. It was surprisingly heavy. I clasped it around my left wrist. The metal was icy against my skin. I stepped back outside. The roaring hadn't stopped, but it had changed. It sounded distant now, unfocused, like a radio station struggling to find its signal. The sound was still there, but the bone-jarring, terrifying proximity was gone. The iron worked. As I stood there under the cold starlight, trying to process the impossible, my flashlight beam caught something glinting on the ground near the big cat enclosure. I knelt and picked it up. It was a seed pod, dark and woody, unlike anything native to Arizona. It looked ancient, something from a jungle thousands of miles away. It felt wrong in my hand, a piece of a puzzle I was terrified to solve. The days that followed were a tense truce with the impossible. I clung to logic, to my training. I started my own quiet investigation under the guise of reviewing Dr. Briggs' old case files. This led me to Maya Jiang, a bright, data-driven zoological researcher working on a temporary grant at Stone Pine. She was initially wary of my probing questions, but when I mentioned the strange fear reactions from the wolves, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "I've seen it too," she admitted, lowering her voice and pulling up a file on her laptop. "Look at this. Acoustic analysis of the wolf pack's vocalizations. These fear signatures. They're off the charts. It's the kind of stress you'd see in a prey animal during a direct attack from a predator they've never encountered. But there's nothing out there." She then showed me audio files she'd captured on her long-range microphones. Recordings of the same disembodied roars I'd heard. Sounds that she, with all her expertise, couldn't identify. My duties eventually forced me to confront the refuge's strangest feature, the extinct species wing. It was a series of large, high-security enclosures, impeccably maintained, but utterly empty. Polished brass plaques on each one bore the names of creatures from nightmare and history. Smilodon fatalis, Octodosimus, Megalopteros, saber-toothed cat, short-faced bear, Irish elk. It felt like a monument to a lost world. It felt like a monument to a lost world. Remembering the second rule, I stopped by the commissary kitchen and grabbed a vacuum-sealed pack of fresh raw steak. My hands felt foolish, my actions absurd, but the memory of that roar was still a cold knot in my stomach. As I walked down the long, silent corridor of empty enclosures, the air grew noticeably colder. The smell of pine and dust was replaced by the smell of a butcher's shop, raw meat and cold steel. I stopped before the Smilodon enclosure. The plaque gleamed under the luggage security lights. The enclosure was empty, a barren, rocky habitat behind thick bars. Yet, I heard a sound, a low, soft chuffing, the contented sound a very large cat makes. It seemed to come from the shadows in the back of the enclosure. My heart hammered. This was insane. With a trembling hand, I unsealed the steak and tossed it through the feeding slot. It didn't hit the ground. It vanished mid-air with a soft, wet, tearing sound. And from the empty shadows, a deep, rumbling purr of satisfaction echoed through the corridor. A sound so real, so powerful, it vibrated through the concrete floor. I backed away slowly, my mind refusing to process what my senses were screaming at me. Later that day, Maya called me to a research station, her voice tight with a nervous excitement. "Diego, you have to see this." I was scrubbing through old security footage from last month, from the night that big horn sheep went into unexplained cardiac arrest. The camera angles are terrible, lots of glitches, but look. She played the clip. The footage was grainy, flickering. It showed the sheep enclosure, the animals clearly agitated. Then for about 3 seconds before the screen dissolved into static, a figure came into view at the edge of the frame, standing near the fence line, just watching. The resolution was poor, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It wasn't an animal. It was Marla Breck, her posture calm, her hands clasped behind her back, a silent observer in the dead of night. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. Malus Nocturnal visit to the enclosures was a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of her professional persona. A director shouldn't be wandering the grounds at 3 a.m. Maya, and I became a quiet, two-person investigative team. We dug deeper, using her academic access and my pretense of organizing old files. We found Dr. Briggs' private veterinary logs, hidden on an encrypted partition of his old desktop. The entries were chilling. He documented phenomena that defied all biological science. Female herbivores in the southern pasture exhibiting phantom pregnancies, their bodies preparing for phantom births. The primate troop engaging in extreme, frantic territorial aggression, but only towards one specific direction. The administrative building's basement, an area Marla had told me during my tour was a climate-controlled archive for sensitive historical documents and benefactor artifacts, and was strictly off-limits to all but senior staff. My conversations with Kevin Dune grew more frequent. I started sharing a little of my whiskey with him on his rounds, loosening his tongue. One night, huddled in the security shack against a biting wind, he finally told me the story of the intern. His name was Leo, Kevin said, staring into his cup. Smart kid, a real go-getter. A year ago, maybe more, Marla had him checking a faulty lock on a service door, one of the ones on the side of the admin building. It was late. I was making my rounds and I saw him from a distance. The door, it just swung open on its own, Diego. Not a gust of wind. It just opened. Leo didn't move. He just stood there, staring into the dark hallway, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Kevin took a long swallow of whiskey. Took me maybe 30 seconds to get over to him. By the time I reached him, he was empty. I shone my light in his face. Nothing. He looked right through me. I asked him his name. He just blinked. I shook him, yelled at him. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who he was. He just turned, calm as you please, and started walking off into the desert. We searched for 2 days. Never found him. Not a track, not a shred of cloth. Nothing. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrible, sober certainty. Rule 3. Diego. It's not about what's in the dark. It's about what the dark does to you. The story solidified the dread in my bones. The next day, Maya, emboldened by our discoveries, decided to push her luck. I'm a credentialed researcher, she argued. I have a right to see the inventory list for that archive. If there's an artifact affecting the animals, it's relevant to my study. She tried to access the archive's digital inventory from her research station. The result was immediate and violent. A vicious cyber attack, originating from an internal hardwired server, blitzed her system. Her laptop screen went black, a single mocking line of green text flashing for a second. Access denied. Her hard drive was completely wiped. That evening, she met me by the wolf enclosure, her face grim but resolute. She's hiding something, Diego. This proves it. I'm going to take a walk tonight. Get a look at that basement door myself. See if I can get a thermal reading. Something is producing energy down there. I begged her not to. The image of the empty intern fresh in my mind. But she was stubborn. I'll be careful, she promised. I'll stay in radio contact. She wasn't. The radio went silent at 1:45 a.m. I found her research station empty. The next morning, her car was gone from the staff parking lot. Marla Breck called a brief, all-staff meeting. Her face was a perfect mask of professional regret. I'm sorry to announce, she said, her voice smooth and convincing, that Maya Jiang's research grant was unexpectedly terminated by her university last night, due to funding issues. She was quite upset and left without saying her goodbyes. We wish her the best. I looked around at the other staff members. They nodded, their expressions placid. When I mentioned Maya to a ranch hand later, he just looked at me with a vague, confused expression. Maya? Oh yeah, the researcher. She left, didn't she? Weird. The memory of her was already fading, becoming a blurry, indistinct photograph in their minds. She was being erased. Maya's erasure was the final proof. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a hungry, intelligent system, and Marla was its gatekeeper. My grief for a woman I had only just begun to know solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer just investigating. I was at war. That night, I broke into Dr. Briggs's office. Not the main room, but his personal filing cabinet, the one Marla had assured me contained only outdated and irrelevant tax documents. The lock was cheap. Inside, beneath a stack of old veterinary journals, was what I was looking for. His real research. A thick, leather-bound ledger. The journal was a harrowing chronicle of a good man's descent into a world he was not equipped for. The first pages were filled with scientific curiosity, detailing the unidentified roars and strange animal behaviors. Then curiosity gave way to concern, and concern to outright terror. Briggs described the spectral animals in the extinct species wing, which he'd baited with meat just as I had. He wrote of his growing suspicion of Marla, of the secret, late-night deliveries she received, of the wealthy, strange donors she would tour through the off-limits basement. He had identified the source, a name he had found in a shipping manifest for an artifact listed as Peruvian funerary object. Cuenco de los Ecos, he'd written, a bowl of echoes. He theorized it was an acoustic parasite, an entity that fed on sound, life, and memory itself. He gave it a name from the scraps of folklore he'd found attached to the artifact's acquisition papers. Kor-Athak, he wrote, the keeper of dying tongues. As I stood there in the silent office, absorbing the horrifying truth in Briggs's frantic script, the door, which I had carefully locked and wedged, shut with a chair, clicked open. It didn't swing open violently. It glided inward with a soft, deliberate sigh, as if extending an invitation. A profound silence immediately fell over the world. The chirping of the crickets outside, the distant howl of a coyote, the low hum of the office refrigerator. Everything stopped. It was a perfect, absolute vacuum of sound. Rule 3, when a door opens by itself, count backward from 10 and run. My body went cold. My training screamed at me to assess the threat. But Kevin's story, the story of the heiress intern, drowned it out. This wasn't a threat you could fight. It was a presence you had to flee. It was a presence you had to flee. 10. I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly loud in the dead silence. I shoved Briggs's journal into my pack. 9. I could feel it in the doorway. A pressure. A vortex of cold and ancient silence. A void that promised to strip away everything I was. 8. I backed away from the desk, my eyes locked on the open, black rectangle of the doorway. 7. 6. I scrambled for the room's only other exit, the window. My hands fumbled with the latch, my fingers numb and clumsy with terror. 5. I saw it then. A flicker of movement in the doorway. Not a solid shape, but a distortion in the air. A swirling nexus of shadow, splintered animal bone, and the captured silent screams of 1,000 dying things. Kor-Athak, Dada. I threw the window open, the sound of the metal scraping against the frame, a shocking intrusion in the dead air. I tumbled out onto the dusty ground, landing hard, and ran. I didn't look back until I was 100 yards away, hidden in the shadow of a large rock. I risked a glance. The office was just an office. The door was closed. The lights were off. It was as if nothing had happened, but the silence remained, a suffocating blanket over the desert night. And then I read the last, spidery, barely legible entry in Briggs's journal. Written on the final page, she broke the pact. The family was meant to guard it, not feed it. The bowl isn't just a cage, it's a lens. It focuses its power, but a lens can be shattered. The first sounds, the original tongue, the caging song. It fears it. The silence eventually broke, not gradually, but all at once, like a spell shattering. The crickets, the wind, the distant sounds of the refuge rushed back in. So suddenly it felt like a physical blow, but the silence had left a residue, a cold, clean terror that scrubbed my mind of all doubt. Briggs was murdered. Maya was erased. I was next on the menu. Running was no longer an option. It would only be a temporary reprieve. Briggs' last words were a desperate, posthumous plea for a course of action. A lens can be shattered. I had to get to the bowl. I couldn't risk a direct assault on the administrative building. Marla would be watching, and the entity, Kor-Athak, was clearly at her command. I needed a diversion, a big one. My mind falling back on the cold, brutal calculus of my military past, formulated a plan that made the veterinarian in me recoil in shame. I went to the veterinary pharmacy, my hands moving with a grim purpose. I prepared a massive dose of carfentanil, an opioid so powerful it could sedate a bull elephant with a single drop. My target was a magnificent bull elk, the pride of the refuge's North American Plains exhibit. To create a convincing, large-scale veterinary emergency, I had to risk the life of a perfectly healthy animal. The irony was a bitter pill. I fired the tranquilizer dart from a distance, then immediately sounded the code blue animal emergency alarm, a piercing siren reserved for life-threatening situations. As predicted, the refuge erupted in controlled chaos. Staff, including Kevin Dune, scrambled towards the northern pasture. It would buy me at most 30 minutes, with the refuge attention focused elsewhere. I slipped, ghost-like, towards the administrative building. The service door Kevin had described, the one that had claimed the intern, was my entry point. It was unlocked. The corridor beyond was sterile, modern, and silent. I followed the signs for archives, descending a flight of stairs into the basement. The air grew cold, the scent of ozone and something else, that faint, sweet smell of decay, becoming more pronounced. But this was no dusty archive. The basement had been converted into a private, opulent museum. Gleaming glass cases held priceless artifacts from around the world. Egyptian canopic jars, Roman legionary standards, Mesoamerican pottery. It was a billionaire's treasure trove, a showroom for the wealthy, eccentric donors Marla had cultivated. And in the very center of the large circular room, sitting on a black velvet pedestal under a single dramatic spotlight, was the Cuenco de los Ecos, the Bowl of Echoes. It was smaller than I'd imagined, a simple wooden vessel, dark and heavy-looking, its surface carved with intricate swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of my vision. The air around it was freezing, and a low, almost sub-audible hum vibrated from it, a sound that felt like it was trying to rearrange the atoms in my bones. This was the source, the lens, the cage. Impressive, isn't it? Marla Breck's voice, calm and cool, cut through the silence. She was standing by a display of tribal masks, a small, elegant-looking pistol held loosely, expertly, in her hand. She wasn't surprised to see me. She had been waiting. I knew Dr. Briggs's inquisitive nature would eventually rub off on you, Diego, she said, a small, condescending smile playing on her lips. He was a brilliant vet, but he lacked vision. He saw a cage. I see a tool. A tool for what, Marla? I asked, my voice low, my eyes darting around the room, assessing threats, exits. Feeding your investors' egos? Erasing people who get in your way? Don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, gesturing to the bowl. They don't want to save endangered animals, Diego. Not really. They want to buy experiences. They want to touch the sublime, to feel the thrill of the unknown, to believe they can cheat death. And I provide that experience. A bespoke, curated paranormal event. And business, she added, her smile widening, is very, very good. The pieces clicked into place. The phantom roars, the spectral animals, the doors opening on their own. They weren't random hauntings. They were a show. A carefully managed performance, with the staff as the unwilling, and sometimes expendable, stagehands. Briggs, Maya? I asked, my voice tight with cold rage. Necessary write-offs, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She said, her voice devoid of any emotion. They threatened the integrity of the exhibition. They wanted to shatter the lens, when the real genius is in learning how to focus it. She raised the pistol, its aim steady. And now, Diego, you are going to be the star of my next live demonstration. I have a very special investor flying in this evening. He's paying a great deal for a private viewing, and he has a particular interest in human-animal psychic transference. She gestured with the gun towards a control panel set into the wall. A sleek, modern interface of touchscreens and dials wired directly to the pedestal. I've learned so much about Kor-Athak, she said, her eyes gleaming with fanatical light. I can attune its frequency. I can coax its manifestations. Watch. She tapped the screen. The humming from the bowl intensified. The air grew thick and cold. From the shadows in the corners of the room, shapes began to coalesce. First one, then two, then three spectral saber-toothed cats, the Smilodons from the empty enclosure. They were semi-transparent, shimmering with a ghostly light, but their claws and teeth, their low guttural snarls, were terrifyingly real. They padded silently across the floor, their spectral eyes fixed on me, and began to circle. The rules, Diego, Marla said, her voice a triumphant purr. They aren't for survival. They aren't for survival. They are the operating parameters for the show. The iron disrupts the frequency, so the roar seems distant. The meat sates the primal echo, making the manifestation docile. And the 10-second rule? That's just the time it takes for Kor-Athak to get a good clean lock on a subject's memory before it feeds. You have followed the script perfectly. And now, for the finale. The spectral cat stopped circling, crouched, ready to spring. Marla kept the gun trained on my heart. I was trapped. The star of a show where the only applause was the sound of my own screaming. I clutched the heavy iron bracelet on my wrist, my mind racing, searching for the discordant note, the caging song Briggs had written about in his last, desperate scrawl. The spectral Smilodons crouched, their forms shimmering, their ghostly muscles tense to spring. Their snarls were silent, yet I could feel the vibration of their menace in the marrow of my bones. Marla held the pistol with the steady hand of a predator who knows the hunt is over, a smug, proprietary smile on her face. She was the director, and I was the final act. It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship, really, she said, her voice conversational, as if explaining a business model at a board meeting. I provide Kor-Athak with stimulus, with the energy of fear and life force. In return, it gives me these tangible miracles, a gateway to something beyond. And my clients pay handsomely for a glimpse. My mind was a whirlwind, scrambling for the clue from Briggs's journal. The first sounds, the original tongue. It fears Yan Hoa, or Kor-Athak, as Briggs had named it, was a mimic, a creature of echoes. It replicated the roars of dead predators, the fear of living prey. It built its reality from the sounds of others. What sound was uniquely its own? What sound could it not replicate because it was the source of its own subjugation? The cats lunged. I didn't run. I reacted. I tore the heavy iron bracelet from my wrist and threw it, not at the cats, but at the sleek control panel on the wall. The heavy iron smashed into the touchscreen with a shower of sparks and shattered glass. The effect was immediate. Marla screamed in fury as her control over the show was severed. The spectral cats faltered, their forms flickering violently, their snarls turning into a sound of confused, screeching static. They were no longer being directed. They were raw, untethered manifestations of the entity's power. "You fool," Marla shrieked, firing the pistol. The shot went wide, ricocheting off a glass display case with a sharp crack as I dived behind a heavy stone sarcophagus. "You've taken away my control. Now it will be indiscriminate." She was right. The humming from the bowl intensified, becoming a deep, angry thrum. The entity was no longer performing. It was lashing out, but the broken control panel had given me an idea. Briggs had left more than just his journal. His work phone, which I had retrieved from his office, was in my pocket. He had been a man of science, a meticulous researcher. If he had found a clue, he would have saved it. Huddled behind the sarcophagus, my hands shaking, I scrolled through the phone's files. There were audio recordings, veteran notes, and then I saw it. A folder labeled Ethnography, Peruvian Expedition, 1934. Inside was a single, crackling audio file. Its title was Shamanic Caging Chant, Last of the Unku Tribe. This was it. The original tongue, the sound of the entity's own prison bars being forged. Marla was trying to reboot the damaged control panel, her back to me. The spectral cats were dissolving and reforming, their movements now chaotic and unpredictable. I had one chance. I held the phone, my thumb hovering over the play button. I remembered Briggs's last words. A lens can be shattered. I had to get closer to the lens itself, the bowl. I took a deep breath and broke cover, sprinting from behind the sarcophagus directly towards the pedestal in the center of the room. Marla spun around, her face a mask of disbelief and rage, and raised the pistol. "Get away from that!" she screamed. "Get away from that!" she screamed. But I was already there. I stood before the humming, vibrating Cuenco de los Ecos. The air around it so cold it burned my lungs. I could feel its power trying to worm its way into my mind, trying to find my memories, my fears. It whispered to me in the voice of my fallen military dog, a whimper of pain. It showed me a flicker of Maya Zhang's face, her eyes wide and empty. I ignored it all. I raised the phone, aimed it at the bowl like a weapon, and pressed play. The sound that erupted from the phone's small speaker was nothing I had ever heard. It was not a song, not a language of words, but something far more ancient. A series of deep, guttural, rhythmic clicks, pops, and resonant throat singing. A sound that was both biological and geological. The sound of shifting rock, and a beating heart, and a dying breath all at once. It was the caging song. The effect on the entity was immediate and catastrophic. A piercing, multi-toned shriek, like 1,000 animals dying at once, exploded from the wooden bowl. This was not a sound Kor-Athak could mimic. This was a sound it remembered. It was the sonic key to its own prison, the command code for its own submission. The spectral cats dissolved instantly into screaming, black static. The humming stopped, replaced by a sound of pure vibrational agony. The Cuenco de los Ecos began to glow with a sickening internal light. A web of fiery cracks spread across its dark, carved surface. The ancient power, turned back in on itself by the sound of its own binding, was tearing its vessel apart from the inside. "No," Marla screamed, a sound of utter despair, her ambition and power crumbling to dust in a matter of seconds. "My collection, my power." She raised the pistol to fire at me, to stop the sound, but it was too late. The imploding energy from the bowl created a localized vortex, a whirlwind of screaming sound and shadow, centered on the artifact. Marla, standing too close, was caught in the maelstrom. She was not ripped apart. Something far worse happened. She was unraveled. Her physical form flickered, her voice dissolving into a frantic chorus of echoes. Her own words, the roar of the Smilodon, the whisper of the wind, the click of the caging song. She was being broken down into her component sounds, her memories, her essence absorbed by the dying entity as its final desperate meal. She became the last dying tongue the Keeper would ever consume. With a final, silent scream, her form was pulled into the shattering bowl. The bowl exploded, not with a bang, but with a silent implosion of light, followed by a shower of inert, blackened splinters of wood, and a puff of ancient dust, and then silence. A true, clean, blessed silence. The cold was gone. The presence was gone. The air smelled only of dust and ozone from the shattered control panel. I walked out of the refuge that night and never looked back. The official story, the one the world could digest, was that Marla Breck, a disturbed and obsessive collector, had died in a tragic fire caused by faulty wiring in her secret, illegal basement showroom. The refuge was shut down, its assets seized, its surviving animals relocated. I found a job at a small, quiet animal shelter in a town where the loudest noise is the afternoon school bell. For the first time in years, I felt a measure of peace. The echoes in my own head had finally started to fade. Then, a month ago, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a single, smooth, dark splinter of wood, unmistakably a fragment from the shattered bowl. Beneath it was a photograph. The photo was of a new gleaming museum exhibit, the Breck Collection, Echoes of the Lost World, sponsored by a consortium of anonymous wealthy donors. And in the center of the exhibit, under a spotlight, was a new artifact, a smaller, intricately carved ceremonial knife, described on the plaque as the sister artifact to the legendary Lost Cuenco de los Ecos. Tucked behind the photo was a small embossed card. It read, "The collection is incomplete. A new lens requires a new keeper. We know you hold a piece of the original. We know you remember the tune. The piece is gone." The silence is no longer a comfort, because now, when I listen very closely, I know that they are listening too, and they are waiting for me to lead them to the rest of their collection.